We should probably talk about the fact that you're going to start seeing this aspect recommended on a lot more builds, I assume, because this thing alone is taking a build that's doing somewhere around 3 to 12 billion DPS against a single target, up to somewhere around 250 to 500 billion damage with only a couple more targets added onto that, to an absolutely insane couple trillion damage if you can actually find monsters who can live long enough to soak up all of the damage. Or at least last long enough than your squishy Necro. But seriously, let's go ahead and talk about this combination, because I assume it's probably going to break the game. Now, while you may be using a Cursed Touch on some other builds for applying Vulnerable, I know at least at one point the Rogue players were doing this. This is something that the Necromancer has never really equipped to ourselves, ever, because we just don't have vulnerable issues, #NecroLife. But it's not even really just this aspect. That's not the thing somehow magically doing all the damage. It's actually one of the boss powers. And in fact, it's a boss power that doesn't do damage at all. Now, I just want to preface this by saying I did not discover this. It was actually recommended to me while I was trying out a Bonestorm build by one of my YouTube viewers. Sadly, at that time, I didn't have enough energy in my body to actually go out and test exactly what they were talking about, but it had to deal with the combination of Flesh Reapers and Varshan's Lifesteal, something that I wanted to investigate for my Blight Necromancer, because this says apply a whole bunch of shadow damage over time, and oddly enough, the Blight Necromancer is really good at scaling that. But how does Flesh Reapers take my damage from 100 billion to a couple trillion? Well, it's in how the functionality of this boss effect in a Cursed Touch works. Flesh Reapers will trigger anytime you deal damage to a vulnerable target. It will remove the vulnerability and it'll apply a huge amount of stagger or a long stun. That's why if you see me running around and attacking monsters with any of my abilities, they are immediately stunned. Everywhere I go, I just hit them with a basic skill and bada bing, bada boom, they're stunned. I start spamming my skills and then I use the Vortex ability from the Spiritborn. And all of a sudden, in this Pit Tier 105, which I cannot stress enough, the Blight Necromancer should not be in this Pit Tier, hence why I'm dying so often. But you'll notice that that Elite Pack was actually very close to dying before I got popped myself. You see, a Cursed Touch has two separate parts to it. The first part is Lucky Hit chance to be able to apply Vampiric Curse. And Vampiric Curse, if you look down in the bottom there, says that enemies will grant a soul on death. You can get up to 8 of them. And if you cast a Macabre skill, they'll release. So what does that matter? Well, the second part of this effect says that enemies afflicted with Vampiric Curse are vulnerable. And this is a permanently reapplying status effect. If they have the curse on them, they are vulnerable. So even if you were to remove their vulnerability to be able to trigger this power, they maintain their vulnerable status. Now you just need to be able to hit them a lot to be able to stack as many instances of Varshan's Lifesteal as possible. Varshan says that activating your main boss power will deal damage in an area around the enemy that applies a very powerful but short duration shadow damage over time effect. Just looking at the scaler here, this is scaling at 1400% of your weapon damage, 14 times the stat on your weapon. Now, just to give you a quick example, our Blight itself is only scaling up to 337. So each tick of this is doing 4 times as many damage instances as my Blight is. And this Blight occurs over 6 seconds. This amount of damage, which is 4 times as strong, occurs over 2 seconds. We're talking about magnitudes of larger amounts of damage here. But remember, it is dealing damage to nearby enemies. The more enemies that you can apply a Cursed Touch to, the more enemies that you can strip the vulnerability away from and it will stay on, meaning the more instances that you can trigger simultaneously. Every single monster that you add to the grouping doubles your total instances of all damage. This is exponential damage growth. That's how we're going from 100 billion to multiple trillions just by attacking a pack of enemies. So this alone is already incredibly strong. If you can scale damage over time, while it can't crit or overpower, you do get the benefit of the vulnerability, and then your individual class might be really good at scaling dots. Obviously the Sorceress comes to mind, but the Necromancer shines here exceptionally well because we have a particular legendary node by the name of Wither. Wither says that we will increase our corrupting damage or shadow damage over time 71% of the time to do over 4 times as much damage. So the vast majority of the time we are quadrupling the damage output of each one of these damage instances from Varshan. They all deal damage in an area around each other, and they all hit each other. So then you just got to find a bunch of things that scale either corrupting damage or shadow damage or non-physical damage or damage over time, and you yourself will be able to trigger this on your own build. Now, Blight goes a little bit further in that even though I'm only casting this core skill, I think close to 3 times per second, you'll notice that I have a lot of projectiles coming out. And that's because Ebon Piercer will fire out 4 additional projectiles. So every time that I cast this, I get 5 in total. That's 5 damage instances, all ripping vulnerability off and all proccing the damage from Varshans. Goes even further though. Chance to cast Blight projectiles twice. 1 instance can fire off a total of 10 missiles out of this. Now, I do think that there is some kind of maximum proc rate for this because I was using a separate trigger to be able to try to find some way to measure this, and I do think that this is the second piece of the puzzle that some other builds might be able to scale, because this one can crit and it can overpower. Belial's Crystal Decoy for the modifier says that activating your main boss power will fear nearby enemies and deal 350% shadow damage to them. So this deals damage to every single person that it triggers on. And I was using this as kind of a litmus test to see how often I could actually trigger this. Because ostensibly, however many times I do damage with this is however many times I'm triggering with this. And it looked to be somewhere around at least 6 times per skill cast, potentially more. It just gets kind of hard to track all of the damage instances because we don't have a DPS meter, but also there's just so ding-dang many of them. So even just from your boss powers alone, there are a ton of really powerful interactions here. Harbingers grant you a 30% vuln damage boost whenever you activate your main boss power. That doesn't stack, but you have 100% uptime on this since this triggers immediately. The insane amount of stun that you apply, as well as it having double effectiveness against a boss, means that you can nearly instant stagger any boss that you're fighting as long as you have a high enough attack speed. Now, I hear a lot of you might be saying, well, Mac, this is all great for clearing out the pit, but what about the boss? Well, my first thought was to use Lilith's Winds of Hate here, be able to spawn the blisters, right? Even if the boss doesn't have ads or you don't get Tomb Lord's Bone Walls, which are super GG for this setup in this build, even that Blood Lord who summons the Blood Blisters that you always hate because they're too far away from you, no, those dudes just help you to proc even more damage. Is actually kind of insane. But the issue here is that you actually have to hit an enemy with your boss power, and this does not count as hitting an enemy. This doesn't do damage. Varshan's does. So sadly, you actually can't proc these additional blister clones and use them to be able to cheat out more targets. But Indariel's grants you a damage multiplier for damage over time. That's an easy auto include here. But then there's also the easy to fit in Cinerats, will just grant you increased elemental damage, and shadow damage over time is elemental damage. Basically, anybody can throw on Varshan's in this effect, and as long as you then put on your Accursed Touch aspect, you have infinite damage procs to this. The faster you can attack, the more damage you do. The more enemies in your group, the faster you kill them all. Now, what's the best build that's going to be able to use this? I know the Necromancer, again, has really good scalers for this, but I do think I'm going to be topping out somewhere in the realm of against a single target, as long as they, every once in a while, are able to spawn a couple ads for us, or again, you get the Tomb Lord for the Shadow Boss effect. It's probably going to be somewhere around pit tier 95, maybe pit tier 100, if I'm able to actually push and get all of my gear masterworked here. The issue being that at this point, Blight itself is doing almost no damage. It's all coming from the boss power, which is funny because Blight itself also never really does damage. It was all coming from Ebon Piercer. So I guess this is kind of par for the course. But I'm interested to hear what you think other classes would be able to abuse this and be able to output insane amounts of damage. Obviously, Rogue comes to mind with his ability to just kind of hit roughly 12 million times per second. But I'm pretty sure that there are other damage over time builds that would like to look into this, including the Druid, the Sorceress, and maybe on the Barbarian. So let me know what you think. We definitely didn't want walking out of the PTR for the boss powers to completely decimate the actual damage output of any build, and right here, it obviously is. Now that being said, Blight didn't have a lot going for it, so I'm not personally offended that it at least has something to build into this season, but it also kind of shines a light on a little bit of the balance issues that we experience between classes and their inability to naturally scale their damage. So if you have any opinions about that, any cool ideas of how to use this boss power, or if you're the one who hit up my YouTube stream and said, hey, you should probably check this out, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you were excited about this, if you appreciated the video or just how I presented the information, and you're brand new here, consider subscribing to the channel as well. You don't want to miss out on any of this as we continue to progress deeper into the season and builds start to get more and more optimal. Once I'm finished testing this, I will be updating the build guide on Maxroll as well to be able to reflect this. So please do not go up in arms if you don't see it immediately updated. I don't just want to toss it out there and then find out something breaks it. I want to be able to set a good expectation for the guide. Leave a like on the video, leave a comment. It would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.